Have you ever noticed some real inconsistencies in the lives of Christians? For example, have you ever experienced this where you might leave a Bible study on a Wednesday night and on the trip home you get into a massive fit of road rage? For many, their sensibilities are offended at cuss words, yet not so much when they hear a sketchy or offensive joke. I grew up in a church culture that thinks smoking and tattoos, because our body is a temple, are some terrible sins. Yet, we don't practice much self-discipline when it comes to the buffet or potluck line. Many have left a Sunday morning gathering centered on grace and forgiveness, and then refused to leave a good tip at the restaurant because they received less than stellar service that they felt they deserved. I've heard a lot of church folks over the years say, someone should do something about that. Yet they refuse to lift a finger to actually be the one to help find that person. Many are concerned about the bit of sawdust in their neighbor's eye while overlooking the giant 2x4 coming out of their own. Christian-ish simply refers to the condition a believer can find himself or herself in when they have the exterior, the look of a Christian in many or even most areas of their life, but not necessarily the love of Christ in their heart. A Christian-ish, which is a little tongue twister, we'll stay with it, person does some of the things you would expect a Christian to do, and they usually give you the sense that he or she is a good Christian when you're in church with them, or maybe you're doing a church activity, something in our community, in those types of settings. But outside of the church walls and the church community, they become something else entirely. That's what it means to be Christian-ish. It means being a Christian, sort of. And you know what's especially distressing to me about the state in our lives? Is that the longer a person has actually been part of a church community, the more they're in danger of becoming Christian-ish. Because this isn't usually the state of a new believer. And if you've met a new believer at all recently, man, a new believer is generally excited about following Jesus and doing what he says and learning to live as a fresh, new disciple. The kind of half-heartedness that is necessary to be a sort of Christian doesn't usually have an opportunity to develop in a person until some years into their walk with God. Being Christian-ish is usually an ailment of the tenured Christian. And it even often shows up in multi-generational church goers. So as we discuss this topic today, let each one of us, here in this room and online, especially those of us who've been part of the family of God for a long time, let's listen closely to see if we fit any of these descriptions presented. And allow us to pay attention as though we are hearing a bit of a warning of what may be present in our lives. So I guess the best way to start off is we're going to find out together if we are a little bit Christian-ish. And finding out requires three things, so you can count these down as we walk through them a little bit. But first, it requires self-examination. You guys have heard me talk about that a lot over the last months. So if you're a little tired of that phrase, maybe this keeps coming up. It's okay. That's simply, self-examination is simply the ability to look inside yourself, to examine yourself in order to discover what your true condition is. And as we have talked in the past, self-examination is not easy, right? Not an easy thing. It's often demanding, and it can even be a bit painful. And I think the average American Christian in particular seems to find it especially challenging because our faith is often expressive. We have an out there faith with a lot of importance placed on the external displays and our appearance. So it is hard for us to find that calm in our lives and that place to investigate our hearts. But self-examination is vital in order to determine if you are actually living the true selfless way of Jesus or if you're basically sort of Christian. Now, also working with this self-examination is honesty. And honesty, that's the ability to be honest with yourself about what actually is coming across your heart and mind. It's the skill to accept those not so good parts that turns up in the shadows of your life and then deal with them. And this is of the highest importance when we talk about things like transformation in your life from being merely Christian-ish to being an all-in follower of Christ. And it seems to me, and I'm guessing some of you will feel this too, that as I have aged, I see this, that most of us longtime believers, I mean, I have literally never not been part of a church. Born and raised in a church. I've always attended a church. It's the weirdest thing when I miss a Sunday because we're out of town or something. But so as I've aged, most of us longtime believers are more likely to shut down quickly when we begin to try to be honest and examine ourselves. And we just tend to pretend that there is nothing wrong in here. But assessing ourselves honestly requires a total willingness to be honest with yourself about the junk that you have likely accumulated along the way, just like your basements in your house. And this will help you in the transformation of being a sort of to a real deal. From a bit of a pretend to an authentic Christian. Then in the spirit of this honest examination, here's the last little bit of where we're going here, you need to ask yourself some questions, and you've got to give yourself these honest answers. So here's a few questions. Am I concerned with being the kind of Christian? Am I concerned more with being the kind of Christian that others think I should be than I am with actually living the selfless way of Jesus? And you might be getting tired of that phrase. You've heard me say that a lot in the last 4 months. Selfless way of Jesus. And so I don't want you to miss what I actually mean by it, because sometimes it just sounds like a good phrase, right? We all have our Christian speak. I don't want you to lose that. What I mean is the selfless way of Jesus is actually what we're supposed to emulate. So are you more concerned about what others think you should be doing, or by actually emulating Jesus Christ? Next one. Have I compartmentalized my life to the extent that who Jesus is affects only part of my living, but doesn't shape the whole area, every area of my life? Does my feeling of success as a Christian largely depend on completing a checklist of rules and regulations? And do I think that by attending Sunday morning service faithfully, putting some tithe in that offering box, okay, do I think singing some songs, they're good songs, and hearing a message, that I've somehow then fulfilled my Christian obligations? If, as you think of any of those questions, and there's many more that we could have asked, you realize that there's a yes or even a maybe, then you're probably, if you're being honest, teetering on being Christianish. And I know that's tough news. I've been asking myself this all week long. That's hard news. But here's some good news. You're not alone. And you can change. Because I'm sure that you weren't always Christian-ish. And just like myself, I wasn't always wrestling with being Christian-ish. At one time, you were likely, as we would say in the church, on fire. And you found it easy to live this way of Jesus. And you did it with all your heart and with all your most sincere desire because you just wanted to be like him. So, if you're already aware that you have some of these less than desirable tendencies, I want you to take heart, because it is likely that there have always been some Christianish folks in our Christian communities. And this morning, Isabella just read for us an account, a familiar one probably. If you've ever jumped through Acts, this one jumps out at you as you read through. And it's quite relatable as we continue to explore this topic a bit further. And for me, the question that jumps out, and you, I'm sure you had a few if you were sitting with that text just a little bit there in silence. But the questions that jump out for me in Acts 5 is why? And you might have a different why. Because mine's not as in why did God strike them dead? Like, Like, why'd they die instantaneously? Mine is, why did they do it? Why were they dishonest? Why did they pretend? In verse 3 specifically of chapter 5, Peter asked Ananias, why have you let Satan fill your heart? And I believe that Satan couldn't work with what wasn't already there. So one way or another, their hearts, Ananias and Sapphira, their hearts had already moved to a place where they were open to this suggestion. Now, typically, I'm guessing you don't wake up one morning out of the blue and say, you know what sounds good today? I'm going to lie to the Holy Spirit. Hopefully you smirked a little there. I don't think we do that. No. And we don't get all the details here about these two individuals leading up to this day, but we do have a basic idea of this early community of Jesus, and they were probably like them. They were devoted and religiously observant Jews. They were a Jewish couple. And it even is possible that they may have begun following Jesus while he was still on the earth before he ascended. Or perhaps, maybe they were some of those thousands that received the Spirit on the day of Pentecost. But either way, they probably weren't horrible people. They weren't some notoriously bad duo that everyone said, oh man, we got to keep those guys out of here. It's just that somehow, even in those early days of living this new way of Jesus, these two had already become Christian-ish. So allow me to talk with you here this morning about three recognizable characteristics that might have driven them from this wholehearted devotion, what I would say authentically living out their faith, to a diet or a light, L-I-T-E, version of the faith. First, I think it is possible that they were insecure in their faith. You'll see that up there on the screen. They were insecure in their faith. And insecure here meaning that it was known that they had donated less than that entire sum for the sale of their lands. Others would perceive them as less committed than they should be. People would perceive they're not all in. Even though there was absolutely nothing wrong with them keeping part of the money. Peter even said so, and hopefully you can reflect here on the text. In verse 4, he said, the property was yours to sell or not sell, as you wished. And after selling it, the money was also yours to give away. And the thing about communities and groups are that they often exert this powerful pressure to conform, to be like the rest of the group, or to do things just like the rest of the group, even at the cost of withholding honesty and truth. And many times this is unintentional, right? It's not like anyone said, you should be dishonest just so you fit in. It's unintentional, but it happens. And it takes a strong and a confident person to be honestly be who they are when it seems of the majority of the group is being something else. Just think with me. And I know you guys have good imaginations in this room and online. Think about how many spiritual oaths, how many financial promises, even how many marriage vows have been made in church history simply because someone wasn't able to resist the pressure and the expectation of the group. It's also possible that they just wanted to be included. They may have just wanted to be included. For the last so many years, and I can't remember this past year we did not, I don't believe, but we go to this concert called Winter Jam. And I know some adults even go down and serve, but we take the youth group and we go because it's a really inexpensive concert. And that's a pretty cool thing. They have a ton of headlining bands, and we go to this event. But part of the reason why it's a very inexpensive ticket is because they have sponsors, and one of the title sponsors is always a World Vision type organization where they're actually sponsoring children from around the world that need support. And here where I'm going with this before you jump on me for thinking anything bad of World Vision. But that title sponsorship means that about halfway through the event, they roll out a big presentation for about 25 minutes while they do a set change behind them. And during that, they ask everyone in the audience to consider sponsoring a child that night on the spot. And some of the youth would probably tell you that I usually remind our kids ahead of time, do not sponsor a child unless you have talked with your parents. Because no parent likes getting a $40 a month bill that they didn't sign up for. Correct? Okay. But what happens often, and I've seen this happen, is that so at some point they make the presentation, then they ask everyone in the audience. We're looking around Van Andel Arena to raise their hand, and they have ushers that come down and hand them a child to sponsor. And it is a powerful experience when you see, 10 or 12,000 people in Van Andel, and you see about 1,000 of those raising hands. It's exciting. And you want to do it. You see, to belong to a part of a community is such a wonderful work. And Ananias and Sapphira absolutely wanted to be included on that. I mean, they wanted to be part of a group that was all in commitment, and they're sharing with one another. I mean, they were caring for their church community, and it was a beautiful proof of the love of God that was pouring through this early church by way of His Spirit. And I think, who wouldn't want to be part of that? I mean, every time that happens, Ray leans over here shaking her head at least a little, it is a really powerful moment at Van Andel Arena, and I even want to, even though we already have a World Vision sponsorship child. I'm like, oh, it's exciting. Who doesn't want to be a part of that? In reading through the book of Acts, and if you've been looking through that a little bit as we've gone along diving into this, it seems that anyone who could was doing something. And it looks as though they were regularly found to be giving an all-in experience of themselves completely to the cause. And I imagine that the affection and the love generated by such an expression of care and warmth would be something special for them to be part of. And they had this desire to be included in such a thing, and that can be a strong motivator in our lives. And one more here, that there's a third possibility here that we're going to explore, and it's not quite as maybe noble as some of those, but it's still just as human. I think perhaps that Ananias and Sapphira merely wanted to enhance their image as good and compassionate Christians, being the kind of people who gave all without actually being that kind of a Christian. All the benefit, not as much as the commitment. You see, the sort of Christians that appear devoted, and use the right words, and they participate in those dutiful religious activities, but it never truly changes their heart. I think about social media postings right now because this isn't to take away from the good that's being done, but there's this, what I call self-glossing mindset, that it's not good enough to go help someone. I have to record this and do it for the gram. And if you're too old to know what the gram is, that's Instagram. And if you don't know what Instagram is, sorry, we're not going there this morning. But we got to do it for the gram, right? I call it self-glossing. I want to create a bit more of an image that makes me look good, because look what I'm doing. It makes me feel good. That said, I would encourage you not to be too hard on Ananias and Sapphira, and I hope I haven't been either, because they faced their judgment, didn't they? And the truth is, it's recorded in the Bible, and we get to read that forever. Oof. You see, the author here, Luke, who also wrote the Gospel of Luke, shocks us with the outcome of this dishonesty within the community of believers. And I wonder if you can relate to this. Have you ever been caught in something that was so awful that you felt like you would rather die than face the music of having to confess it? Maybe you can think of an example that comes to your mind right away, and you actually felt like you did die. See, Luke here is making sure we recognize this connection between holiness and the original temple of worship, okay? And then the seriousness of holiness in this new community of mobile temples. And if you didn't catch that last week, that's us. The Spirit fills us. We're on the move. Mobile temples. Holiness and the temple go together. See, it's a desire not just for those that appear good or merely do good. God wants an actual community of people who are walking in His good ways that have had a real heart change. Insecurity, longing to be included, the need to preserve the right image of being that perfect Christian. These can easily mislead heartfelt and honest believers down the path from being Christian to being Christian-ish. So what about you? How many times have you done Christian stuff simply because you felt pressured to do so? I mean, how often have you joined in a religious and a good work because you had some ulterior motives? How many otherwise good and holy things have you done because doing so kind of cleaned up those flaws, kind of polished up the Christian image? Listen, sin is destructive, and it does lead to death. And along with that, being sort of Christian doesn't end well either. Yet here, these two individuals, they seem to welcome it in. But as we see, living this way didn't help them, and it didn't help others. It doesn't bring a positive love to the community. It doesn't bring great witness to the world around us about Jesus. It doesn't address the real issues that are keeping each of us from being immature or being more mature. The things that keep you immature. It doesn't give you a sense of peace. But make no mistake, being Christian-ish, welcoming in that sin, it will make you miserable. That is a guaranteed experience when we let sin in and it infiltrates our hearts and it begins papering over some of those inconsistencies we listed at the beginning. All those inconsistencies that are sort of Christian behaviors, are sort of Christian expressions. And don't be surprised when you're found to be angry, agitated, a bit too defensive. It's a truly miserable experience. So this morning, if you've recognized the tendency to be Christian-ish, the first thing we already talked about that you need to do is to continue with your self-examination. Particularly, I can't talk this morning, I apologize about that. You have to examine the way that you are living your life. And you're going to have to ask some more key questions. And these questions that you're going to need to ask yourself specifically are drawn from the book of Ephesians. This is the Apostle Paul writing to the church in Ephesus. And this is 4:13. It says this, it'll be on the screen. This will continue until we all come to such unity in our faith and knowledge of God's Son that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. Now I realize we jumped into the middle of a different book and I plucked that verse out real quick and it's a little bit outside of its original context. However, these qualities discussed here by the Apostle Paul are a great guideline for us to use in relation to how we are currently living. And so that's our actionable steps for today, is we need to examine the way, I'm going to ask you to examine the way you are currently living your life and ask some of these questions. The first actionable step is, does it, meaning currently the way you are living your life, promote the unity of our faith in you? Saying that differently for you. Does it place you in the family of God? How you're living your life? Are you part of the family of God? Does it encourage your function as a mobile temple to actually live out this way of Jesus? Does it motivate you to engage in God's kingdom both inside this room right here and outside of these walls? Or does the way that you are currently living isolate you from the believing community? Does it hinder you from helping others? Are you being divisive in your speech and in your actions? The second question is, does it add to your knowledge of Jesus? Does it challenge you to know Jesus better? Is how you are living actually helping you know Jesus more? Is it moving you towards Christ in a prayerful love and devotion? Do you actually have more room for Jesus in your life? We talked about that last week, right? Margin. Folks, if you fill it all up, there's not room for more. The Apostle Paul says it this way in the book of Philippians. He says, I want to know Christ and experience the mighty power that raised him from the dead. Is how you are currently living stirring in you to cultivate a deeper love and experience of Jesus Christ intimately for yourself and in creation, in the world? And the last question is how you are living currently promoting maturity and Christ likeness? Does it encourage you to grow in grace, and does it just leave you kind of stuck and feeling a bit empty and maybe even disillusioned with this whole Christianity thing? Or worse, maybe it's actually moving you backwards. The way you are currently living could be taking you away from Christ and away from a grace-filled maturity. Is the way you're currently living producing more fruits of the Spirit in your relationships and in your interactions with those both inside and outside this family of God? I want you to think specifically of the people that you don't often agree with. How are those relationships going? How are those interactions going? Today, I don't want you to be discouraged. This is a hard topic to talk about, isn't it? To be really brutally honest about. And I don't want you to be discouraged. Because if you have recognized some less than worthy motivations in your life, some of these immature tendencies, realize that you're not alone. But that said, if we recognize these, and we're recognizing that we're found to often be sort of Christian, we have to begin our repair work by placing Jesus Christ back in his proper place as the initiator and the perfecter of our faith, and against which we measure all of our being, our entire life, against Christ as the measuring stick here. So, the truth is you may have made some choices and some decisions that set your life in motion, what I would say, this wrong way. And little by little, as we already admit, you don't usually just wake up one day and say, I'm going that way. That's not how it happens. But little by little, it transforms your life into something less than faithful. And it may have gone as far as to corrupt and even pollute your love of what is actually true. And it changed it into something that is less than honest. If that's where you're at today, I have good news. You can make another choice, beginning today, and then continuing into tomorrow. In weeks at a time, you start putting this together. Because you can follow these actionable steps, these 3 questions, that you can begin every day and you can end every day with. And they will help move you from the path of being merely Christian-ish to being a truly faithful and honest and authentic and real deal mobile temple. Truly an all-in participant in this way of Jesus Christ. So the last question this morning, and then we're done, that you have to answer is, are you willing to do this? Let's pray.